When the Mesa Southern Railroad pushed through Redmont in 1871, much of the labor that laid its track came from China. Young men, most from the southern province of Guangdong, who had crossed an ocean looking for work. When the rail was finished, some moved on. Others stayed. They settled on the west bank of the Red River, on low ground nobody else wanted. A floodplain, the poorest land in town. A laundry, a general store, a boarding house with meals that reminded them of home. The locals called it Chinatown. The men who lived there simply called it theirs. It was a tight-knit community of several hundred at its peak. They faced the same hostility that drove Chinese settlers from mining towns across the west. But Redmont was small enough and remote enough that the worst of it passed them by. When Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, the community began to shrink. No new arrivals came to replace those who left or grew old. By the early 1900s, only a handful of families remained. But what they built did not disappear. The city of Redmont, recognizing what so many other Western towns had lost, chose to preserve it. Today, those few blocks still stand. The signage, the storefronts, the gate. A quiet reminder that this town was built by more hands than history usually remembers.
Hello, and welcome back to Redmont. Just going to do a little flyover of what was built in the last week's episode. This is the small farming community of Willard. Out on the outskirts of our region, just out by the edge of the map here. Very happy of how this all turned out. I will be coming back in here and expanding it ever so slightly over time as this region builds out. I'll be just adding more farms to the surrounding area as we go, but the city itself will remain this size. For this week's episode, I'm going to be focusing my attention back on Redmont for a little bit. There's a small community within Redmont that needs attention before we move on to other communities across the area. First off, now that we have a farming community, we don't need the farms immediately adjacent to town, so we're going to be removing those and looking at a tremendous amount of backup there for some reason. I'm not sure why. Fairly early on in the development of Redmont, these farms immediately adjacent to the city would have been replaced with more suburban housing. I'm not going to get crazy with it here. It's just going to be a continuation of the grid we've already established. At an elementary school. We already have an elementary school very close by to this. It's masquerading as a civic building, and also it's getting kind of full, so we can use another small school out here. I'm not going to be spending a huge amount of time detailing out this area, just enough to make it integrated into the rest of the city, add a few more trees and surfaces just to finish it off. The reason I'm not focused too much on detailing here is this highway that's running right on the outskirts of town. I'm not decided yet how that's going to change over time. I don't know if it's going to remain a highway or if it's going to be like downgraded into like a commercial strip of some sort for the city. I haven't decided that yet, so I don't want to spend a huge amount of time here detailing. Right around the school, I'm going to add some sports fields, functional soccer field, and then a surface decal here for a baseball diamond. To be honest, there's not a lot of detailing to do for these neighborhoods. The biggest issue I have is probably the lawns. I think these are a little too vibrant and green. I would change them out for surfaces a little more appropriate. The problem with that is when you do that, it separates the surface from the actual building. So if I had to come back in here to change stuff, it's just more stuff to delete. So I'm just going to leave it as it is for the moment. But I am going to add some more trees and grass surfaces in between here just to blend it a little better so it's not so stark. This week's episode is not as finished as I would like it to be. I had several computer issues that consumed quite a bit of time this week. I also was fighting graphics problems within the game. Of course, everybody's aware of the patches they just did that changed the graphics settings. It really messed up the game really badly for me, and we'll see examples of that later in the episode. It consumed way too much time and just distracted me from actually getting actual work done. Down here, I'm adding what is going to be more of a modern housing development. I'm not going to be building too many of these quite yet. As we expand the city out into the surrounding area, these will become more prominent. I'm using these 2x2 vanilla assets here. I think these work really, really nice for just generic cookie cutter homes. I'm going to pack them in really tight. These people don't have any yards or any outdoor space really at all. This would have been a housing development, say from like the 1980s or something like that. And give them a quick recolor, so get rid of these vibrant colors. Those would be probably a no-no. Just make everything look a little plainer. I'm going to be just spending a little bit of time here to better integrate the school into the surrounding neighborhood. I'm going to add a parking lot. Extend some of these surfaces so they connect with the sidewalk. And add some trees and some grass surfaces to finish it off. And that's it for that neighborhood. Okay, for the neighborhood I'm going to be building for this week's episode, it's going to be down here. This all leveled up into level 5 buildings. This is kind of why I don't want to use the zoning. Everything just levels right up to level 5. This is going to be a historic neighborhood. I kind of hemmed and hawed about whether or not to actually include this because historically it's probably a little inaccurate, but I'm going to be building a very, very tiny Chinatown. Now, the reason I hemmed and hawed about it is for this particular region of the United States, it's highly unlikely there would be a Chinatown. The Chinese were pretty much driven out of this area historically. Here I'm going to be using one of the lift bridges without the lift, just to give us a little different style of bridge. It's kind of a clever way to get more variety of bridges. Okay, so the Chinatown. This is maybe slightly historically inaccurate. It's unlikely in this region of the United States there would be a Chinatown. I'm imagining it's more of a modern reimagining or like a restoration from the city of Redmont at some point, maybe in the late 20th century. They recognized the historic importance of the Chinese community, what it played in the history of the city, and this was an attempt to acknowledge that. The Chinatown historically would be very, very tiny, like a couple blocks at most, a few hundred people at most. It probably would not have persisted past the early 20th century if it even made it to that point. So what we see here is basically the modern city of Redmont acknowledging the historic past and recreating it. I know the title was don't treat your Chinatowns like theme parks. And what I'm trying to do here is kind of explain the history of the place. If you think about Chinatowns in North America, the history of them is rather complicated. And historically, this would be an area as old as any other part of Redmont. So it needed to be established early. That's why I come back in here to build it out. For the residential homes, I'm using these. These are assets by Smiley's. These are super nice looking assets. Historically, these would have been like slum tenement housing. But in recent times, as the city of Redmont has kind of gentrified the area, these have been rebuilt. Right along the river's edge here, this is going to be a bit of an industrial area. I think in North American settings, the main thing you should remember when building a Chinatown is anywhere in North America, historically, the Chinatown would have been a slum, a ghetto in some areas, right? It's not a place people will want to live. Even though the actual Chinatown is only a couple square blocks, the entire neighborhood around it should reflect the history of what it actually was. So all these level 5 luxury homes need to go. They no longer belong. I'm going to try to think about the entire neighborhood historically. So even though the Chinatown is teeny tiny, a couple blocks, it did have an influence on the development of the neighborhood immediately around it. It would have started as slum tenement housing, which is what we're trying to represent here of all these row homes. And over time, the city of Redmont recognizes the historical importance of the area. It basically gentrifies the entire area. Now these are all it's all a very trendy neighborhood, kind of an artsy community probably lives around here. I do like how these tenement houses interact, or these houses interact with the hillside here. This is how they should interact with the hillside, not the way the game usually handles it. For the commercial streets in this neighborhood, we're going to go with the northeast buildings here. These are appropriate, historically appropriate. Once again, these neighborhoods would be almost as old as the rest of the city, and the buildings should reflect that. by the park here. I'm imagining this area, we're kind of moving towards what will eventually become the modern financial hub for the city. Property values are much higher here. This is really where the city starts to rebuild, like on the outskirts of this area. This is where the city really starts to build up to more of the financial hub. So I'm going to pick buildings that kind of reflect that. In typical fashion for me, I just jump around all over the place, building bits and pieces of things as I go. I'm just going to use Move It here to kind of pack these in a little tighter. Now, it's a little premature to build a hospital at the size I'm going with here, but I'm going to go with the Eastern European Hospital. The reason I'm doing this is the style of it. It feels like something that would have been built maybe in the 1950s, 1960s. It feels appropriate for the time period. It is overkill for the size of the city right now. It's way too large. I couldn't really figure out a way to, do this kind of in a gradual way. So I'm going to place it now. Use better bulldozer to get rid of some of the assets or some of the props around it that don't make any sense. And there was a bit of a jump here. I was having quite a number of computer issues this week, which kind of cut into the time to build everything. I also was having graphics issues, which really made a mess of everything. This is kind of the neighborhood I built up so far. It's kind of a mix of historic and modern. We have like a fairly large tenement house in the middle here, like low-income housing. Kind of a reflection maybe of the 60s or 70s. It would have been still kind of an impoverished area. And that was probably when that building was built. We have a low-density commercial strip here, and on the other side of it, we're going to transition back into low-density residential. Right around the church here is kind of going to be the center point for where our modern financial hub for the city is going to be built. It's still too early to get too carried away building down here. We're not looking at any major high rises or anything like that, but I am going to start including some buildings just to bump up the height ever so slightly, and a few more modern buildings as well. I am concerned about the number of pedestrians. I mean, it's great to see this number of pedestrians, but it's also extremely unrealistic to have that many people walking. Quick overview of what's been built so far. Okay, so a quick break from our Chinatown build. Another thing I need to include right now, even though it's I'm not going to be detailing out too much, is a cargo hub. I'm going to spend some time redrawing the rail lines here and the highway just to kind of accommodate it on the north side of the river. Right here, I'm looking for the bridges. I'm trying to find something a little nicer looking than the vanilla bridge here. And once again, we're going to go try out the lift bridges without the lift. This is kind of a clever way to get more variety of bridges. This one is really cool, but it's only a single track, which is not very helpful here. Maybe I can find a place for it somewhere else. This one's the viaduct, which is, maybe more appropriate in an urban setting, but not out here. And the two-way one here is quite nice as well, and this is what I'm going to go with. It is a nice industrial-looking bridge. You see these bridges this style, rail bridges this style all over rural areas, so we're going to go with that. Now I have this kind of a mess down here of the highway and the rail, and I got to figure out a way to kind of sort it out. This is not going to be the final version of this interchange here. This is kind of more of a in-between stage still. Rather than having the rail line go over the highway, we're going to have the rail line at ground level, and we're going to have the highway go over it instead. I'm going to redraw the rail line to just give myself a little more room to work with the roads around here. We're going to elevate the highway up over the rail line and across the river, and I'm going to keep it elevated on the far side here to allow rail lines to pass underneath it. Replace that with a roundabout and just draw some highway connectors here to connect the two highways. This is pretty much a Mickey Mouse solution. We can imagine maybe a city council in the past. They didn't have a budget for proper road infrastructure, so they came up with this half-baked solution. I mean, you can get from one section to another, but it's not elegant. And I got to redraw this highway here. This intersection here is going to be really a problem in the future. So I'm going to redraw it and connect the highway a little farther down. The reason why that intersection is a problem there is we have that rail crossing right beside it. A lot of heavy trucks turning there to get into the industrial zone. Add a few merging lanes here. And come back in and redraw our rail line. Now there is another bridge in there. I was trying to figure out a way to connect the rail line going the other direction up to this area. Eventually I decided not to do it. It doesn't look good. I'll have to figure out a different solution. And we've got a fairly large flat area on the other side here. This is going to be where our cargo terminal is going to go, plus a bit of an industrial hub. I'm going to be creating a brand new outside rail connection here. I'm going to be drawing it up a valley area up for the map here. I used a constant slope tool here to draw out, kind of smooth out the landscape to make it a little more appropriate for a rail line. Once I come back in here with the soften tool, this will look all fairly natural. For the outside connection, we're just going to tunnel right into the mountainside here. This is really quite messy, and I will have to come back in here and fix this at some point. I hate tunnels in this game. The game just does not handle this well at all. And once you hit it with the soften tool, this all looks fairly natural. The grade is a little steep. I think it's coming in around just over 3%. But because it's consistent throughout the entire valley, it doesn't look bad. I'm not really too focused on getting hyper-realistic grades. For the cargo station, I want one where the trains could just pass right through it. So we're going to go with this one. top of our rail line and connect it up to our main line. This is fairly temporary. I'm just establishing the area for where this belongs and the industrial area around it. So as I'm building out the rest of the city, I don't accidentally start building into it. I want to make sure I have enough space set aside for the industrial area. And I'm going to have a little bit of a rethink here where some of these roads connect up. And I'm going to use the road directly off the cargo station here to create a new grid. I'm using the outside road connector tool here to get rid of all the train traffic from outside connections. It's inappropriate. It's all just a whole mismatch of different trains. All I really want here are my passenger trains, and these, I'm going with this 40 car train for the cargo trains. These are the only trains I want traveling through my region. It doesn't make sense to have all the different types of trains coming through here. And as I build out the regions around the city, I'm going to be adding the appropriate industries. So we just built a farming community, so the grain silo here makes perfect sense. And as I build out other resource-based communities, I'll be adding the other supply chain industries, probably to in and around the cargo station here. I'm going to be expanding the cargo station with the addition here. I think this looks really nice. I want the cargo hub to look substantial. At this end, this seemed like a good place to create an overpass here to get up and over the rail lines. You'll start noticing here, I'm having more and more, I forget how this happened, but there was the initial patch that screwed up the graphics, and then they had a hot fix to try to fix it. For some reason, the hot fix didn't work for me, and you'll see as we go here, I'm going to have more and more issues with graphics. It gets quite bad. It becomes a huge distraction, and unfortunately, I didn't get as much done as I wanted to because it literally sucked up hours and hours of time trying to fix it. The biggest problem is this is a custom map with custom surfaces, which were made under the original graphic settings, and I thought looked really, really good with those settings. Whatever they've done has changed it, and I can't get it to look the same. I mean, I probably could play around with it a little more, but right now it looks quite the mess, and I'm very unhappy, and I'm not really sure what I'm going to be able to do about it, but I got to work with it a bit more. But it sucked all the oxygen out of the room for this episode, basically. I'm going to be zoning a little bit of industry around here. I'm not going to get crazy with it. Industry needs a lot of space. You don't want to crowd it in. I do want to leave a lot of this open for the supply chain industry as I add it to the region. So we don't want to overbuild it yet. Now this is a real mess down here. I got too many nodes going on. I'm going to be adding some turning lanes here to make this just a little easier for the trucks to get in and out. Cleaning this up because it's just a disaster. traffic management mod here to kind of like control some of these turns, make this feel a little more realistic. Okay, I'm just going to expand out the suburban residential neighborhoods now. I'm mostly going to be going with the Southwest Region Pack residential buildings for here. They seem to be the most appropriate. There are some vanilla assets that look quite nice as well, and I probably will use some of those in some of the other suburban areas as well. It's a little too early to be adding too much height to this area, but I want to start to add a little bit just to indicate where the direction where the development is going. This seemed like a pretty nice, fairly generic looking office building with just a little bit of height to it, but not too crazy. So we're going to add that. You can see how it blends into the rest of the cityscape. Now I'm going to just spend a bit of time integrating the hospital into the surrounding landscape. Going to be expanding the surface parking. There's definitely not enough of it included with the hospital. I'm going to be including a couple of office buildings here. I'm imagining these to be associated with the hospital in some way. They might be administration offices, or they could be specialty labs attached to the hospital. And a parking garage directly across the street from the hospital. Switch out some of the vanilla surfaces or something that might look a little more interesting. And fill in the grass surfaces so they match the park directly across the street. Finish it off with some bushes and trees and a few decorative shrubs. Now the surface fill tool, I hate it and like it all at the same time. Most of the time it doesn't work very well, but for some reason on like these invisible roads, it works fairly well. It's fairly quick. But yeah, on the grass surfaces and stuff like that, it seems to be more of a pain in the butt than helpful. Okay, I'm just going to spend a bit of time finishing off the surfaces for our Chinatown district. This is where the graphics issues become really quite bad and became a huge distraction. So unfortunately, this is not as complete as I would have hoped it to be. But it just gives you an idea of what the detailing work I did throughout the neighborhood. It's fairly standard fare for me now. Surfaces, bushes and shrubs, and quite a few decals to distress the paved surfaces, that sort of stuff. I imagine this park here is probably part of the city's attempt to gentrify the neighborhood connected to the waterfront. Immediately adjacent to the river, it's still kind of a bit of an industrial footprint, so not highly desirable, so we can fill it in with a few parking lots. Now, I thought this round building would fit perfectly in this kind of bend in the river here, almost as if it was designed specifically for this location. I have to come back in here and kind of fiddle around with it a bit more. It doesn't, the way it's kind of sitting here, I think I have to redesign this a little bit, make it a little nicer looking. This extreme retaining wall here right next to the cycling path, graphical issues here, you can probably see them popping in and out. So I have to come back in here and fix this. Yeah, you can see it right there. And once again, for I don't know what time, how many times I've done this now, is just replace the trees along the river that I removed to work on. This is the reason why I'm not don't get too crazy in the detailing quite yet. Now, where these buildings meet up here of the hill, there's a bit of jank on the hillside here. And we're just going to use some trees to, especially right down in here, I'm just going to use some trees to hide some of this so it's not so obvious. Although I am quite impressed how close you can get these buildings together and it still looks really quite nice. I think that turned out really well. This is a historic neighborhood, which has been here as long as any other part of the city, so some fully mature trees would be appropriate. Going with the birch here so it doesn't obscure the buildings or anything like that, so we can still see what was built. And here's where the graphics become quite the mess, and I had to edit out quite a lot of this because it just looked awful. You'll notice as I'm moving the camera around, the lighting will change constantly, which became a huge distraction. Yeah, right there you can see it happening. I was very, very unhappy at this point. So yeah, we're going to add some decorative sidewalks. I'm not sure what graphics setting I accidentally hit here, but what I had to do was go in and delete out the settings file completely just to reset the game back to vanilla and start again because I could not figure out what I've done here. The block I'm working on right here, this is pretty much ground zero for Chinatown. This one little block would be, where the city kind of focused all its restoration efforts. I found these lanterns on the mod store. These are really, really nice. I'm a little late for Lunar New Year, unfortunately, but we can imagine maybe that's what it's about. For this odd-shaped block down here, I'm going to go with the urban promenade buildings. This section of the city would be very modern looking. And in the few blocks immediately around Chinatown, I'm going to be just doing a little bit of detailing to the roads themselves, adding a bit of wear and tear. I said this before in a previous episode, I cannot wait till there are actually custom road assets, so I don't have to do this sort of work. I like the effect, but it takes a fair amount of time to do it. Okay, I'm just going to spend a bit of time detailing up some of the surfaces around Chinatown. Unfortunately, because of the graphics issues, I couldn't use a lot of this footage. It's too distracting, and I was not in a good mood by this point. So I just give you a few highlights of what I'm doing. It's fairly similar to the detailing work I've done elsewhere. Just mostly surfaces and that sort of stuff. that brings us to the end of this episode. Really do appreciate everybody who watches right through to the very end. So, thank you. I will try to work on the graphic settings, see if I can fix them. The reason we didn't get a Monte Palma episode this week is because the graphics were even worse there, and also there's a tree controller issue, which I didn't want to have to deal with. So that's why you got back-to-back Redmont episodes. But next week we'll be back in Monte Palma. Anyway, once again, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next episode. Bye.